She only left you the bookstore? Ha, fitting. You were always the useless one. My sister's voice rang out across the polished marble conference room like a dagger dipped in gold. Her hands were still clutching the inheritance letter, $120 million and full control of our grandfather's empire. Mine? A single key to a forgotten, dust-covered bookshop he once loved. I didn't say a word. Didn't flinch. Just smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile, not the kind that hides pain or screams revenge. It was the smile of someone who knew something no one else in that room did. The next morning, I took the key, drove to that bookshop, and opened the door for the first time in over a decade. I thought I was walking into a memory. I had no idea I was about to uncover a secret that would make my sister tremble in her sleep for years to come. Growing up, I learned early that silence made me invisible, and that invisibility made things easier. While Veronica basked in the spotlight, school valedictorian, debate team star, heir apparent to our grandfather's real estate empire, I stayed in the shadows. I read books no one else bothered to touch, shelved volumes in the corner of his old bookshop after school, and spent summers listening to his slow, gravelly voice speak of things no one in our family cared to remember. Honor, stories, quietness. The world rewarded Veronica. She sparkled at fundraisers, aced every negotiation, and made people laugh at dinner parties even when her jokes cut like knives. The world tolerated me. My parents never said it out loud, but I saw it in the way their eyes lit up around her and dulled when they turned to me. I wasn't ambitious enough. I wasn't polished. I didn't make things happen. Your sister builds empires, Clara, my mother once said over a dinner I barely touched. What do you build, dust? She didn't know I was helping Grandpa catalog his rare first editions that week, books older than any building in the Clara Warren portfolio. She didn't ask. No one ever did. But Grandpa, he saw me. When I was 12 and sobbing because a teacher told me I was too quiet to lead, he placed a small, leather-bound notebook into my hands. The loudest truths, he said, are often whispered. Write yours. I did. After he retired from active business, he spent most of his time at the bookstore. Most people assumed it was just nostalgia. But I knew better. It was his sanctuary. And on quiet afternoons, he'd read my stories while sipping bitter black tea, offering comments in the margins that felt like gold. He never tried to change me. Only remind me that being overlooked didn't mean I lacked value. And yet, when he passed away, I expected nothing. Not because he didn't love me, but because I knew how strong the current of this family was. I'd seen it pull people under. Still, I showed up to the will reading out of respect. And when Veronica strutted into that room in her designer heels, chin tilted like royalty, I knew how this would go. I just didn't expect her to twist the knife so publicly. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grandpa never did anything without intention. If he left me that bookshop, it wasn't to insult me. It was to tell me, look deeper. The will reading was held in a private legal office downtown, all glass walls, leather chairs, and the lingering scent of wealth. Everyone was dressed as if for a gala, not a goodbye. Veronica arrived fashionably late, of course, flanked by her fiancé and two of Grandpa's former advisors. Lipstick perfect, smile sharp. I sat in the far corner, deliberately small, my hands folded in my lap. I wore a navy blue sweater Grandpa once complimented years ago, and shoes that had seen better seasons. No one offered me a glance. I was just the spare, the background character to Veronica's coronation. The lawyer, Mr. Alden, cleared his throat and began. His voice was dry, clinical. No emotion, just execution. To Veronica Warren, he read, I leave my controlling shares in Warren Holdings, as well as my property in Aspen and liquid assets, totaling $120 million. Polite gasps, nods, a few smug smiles. Veronica didn't react much. She didn't need to. Her victory was expected. Her eyes, though, drifted toward me just long enough to smirk. And to Clara Warren, Mr. Alden continued, I leave the deed and full ownership of Waverly Books, including all contents, assets, and intellectual property associated with it. Silence. Then the room exhaled, not out of shock, but amusement. A few relatives chuckled softly. I heard someone mutter, "A bookstore?" Like it was a disease. Veronica let out a light, theatrical laugh. "How poetic," she said, turning to me, voice syrupy sweet. "The useless one gets the useless place." The entire table turned toward me, a moment frozen in disdain. I simply nodded. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked, raising a perfect eyebrow. "No," I said. "There's nothing to say." And I meant it. Because if you speak in a room full of people who've already decided who you are, you're not heard, you're dismissed. I wasn't going to give them that pleasure. Mr. Alden wrapped up the proceedings quickly. Veronica signed some preliminary paperwork with an expensive pen I'm sure she'd had engraved in advance. She kissed cheeks, exchanged numbers, played the heiress role she'd always prepared for. I slipped out the side door. On the elevator ride down, I gripped the key in my coat pocket. Small brass, a little rusted, the kind of key no one made anymore. I thought of Grandpa's hands, weathered but steady as he shelved books alphabetically even in his 80s. I thought of how he smiled every time he passed that dusty little shop window, tapping the glass like it still spoke to him. I didn't know what I would find there. But I knew this. He wouldn't have left me that place. Unless it mattered. The next morning, I stood outside Waverly Books with the brass key clutched in my hand and breath fogging the frosted glass. The street was quiet, just a couple of dog walkers and the distant clink of a barista steaming milk across the block. The shop hadn't changed much. The red paint on the doorframe was peeling, and the wooden sign above creaked in the wind, Waverly Books, in faded gold serif, like an echo from a gentler time. A cracked window pane still bore the handwritten hours in Grandpa's cursive, the ink slightly smudged from rain long ago. I hesitated before unlocking the door. I wasn't sure if I was ready. Not for dust or decay, but for the weight of memory. The lock clicked. The door groaned open like it remembered me. The smell hit first: musty paper, aged wood, a trace of black tea that had somehow lingered in the floorboards. My eyes adjusted to the soft light as I stepped inside. Rows of tall wooden shelves stood like sentinels, their contents undisturbed, first editions still wrapped in their protective covers. Handwritten shelf labels faded but intact. American poetry, Soviet memoir, untranslated Greek. Grandpa had always shelved alphabetically but sorted by soul, not genre. I walked slowly past the counter where he used to sit, humming some forgotten jazz tune while scribbling margin notes into his books. The old armchair in the reading corner sagged just as it used to, still draped with a navy shawl Grandma had knitted before she passed. It was like stepping into a paused memory, and yet something felt arranged. The ledgers on the counter weren't dusty. A pencil sat perfectly sharpened atop the last open page. A small stack of letters, bound with twine, lay neatly to the side. I hadn't been here in years, and no one else should have had reason to visit, so why did it feel maintained? I moved behind the counter, brushing my fingers across the polished wood. That's when I noticed the hollow sound. A soft thud beneath the floorboard, too precise to be wrought. I knelt, ran my hand along the base panel, and found the groove. A small, nearly invisible indent that clicked when I pressed it. The floor creaked open. Just a sliver. Inside, a velvet pouch, a leather notebook, and a folded envelope sealed with wax. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized the seal, Grandpa's initials carved into a tiny stamp he used only for personal correspondence, the kind he never emailed, the kind he handed you in person, looking you in the eye like it was sacred. I sat down on the old stool, heart pounding, fingers trembling. The bookstore wasn't just nostalgia. It was a message. And I had just opened its first chapter. I broke the wax seal slowly, almost reverently. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Inside, a single folded letter in Grandpa's unmistakable cursive, tight but elegant, with firm strokes that barely wavered. "Clara, if you're reading this, then you've already done the most important thing. You showed up. I exhaled shakily. The bookstore was more than a gift. It was a test. This place has always been more than a shop. It's where I hid the pieces of myself no one else wanted to see. You understood that. You always did. He wrote of nights spent in the aisles after business hours, scribbling notes for stories that never saw publication. Of rare books he collected not for profit, but for what they meant. Of secrets, not malicious, but necessary. Quiet truths the world had no room for anymore. And then the tone shifted. Veronica will get the empire. I have no doubt of that. She's earned the stage, but not the soul of this family. That part I leave to you. My heart ached at the line. Not out of pride. Out of grief. Tucked behind the letter was a slim key labeled, Safe, Room 2B, Room 2B. I blinked, confused. The shop had no such room. But then I remembered the spiral staircase in the back, the one sealed off when the upper floor became storage. Grandpa had always kept it locked. I rose, clutching the key, and made my way through the narrow aisles toward the rear. The second floor was coated in dust, but the door marked 2B was real. I unlocked it. Inside, a modest office space with a metal filing cabinet, a bookshelf, and a wall safe embedded behind a framed photo of Grandpa and me at the shop when I was a teenager. I had no memory of that picture being taken. I entered the combination he always used, 617 Grandma's birthday. Click. The safe door opened to reveal a bound portfolio of stock certificates, a notarized will different from the one read at the law office, a USB drive, a small journal. The portfolio alone made me sit down. It listed ownership in multiple shell corporations, blue-chip investments, and a trust fund in my name. Estimated value, $92 million. I stared, blinked, stared again. It wasn't just money. It was a map of something Grandpa had been building quietly, piece by piece in my name, for years. The journal confirmed it. He had been planning this, all of it, a parallel legacy. One Veronica couldn't touch because she never saw it. And the will? Dated 7 months before his death. It named me as the sole beneficiary of his personal assets, including a controlling share of Warren Holdings. It was signed, initialed but never submitted to the family lawyer. There was a note stapled on top. I didn't have the strength for a second war, Clara, but I trust you will. I sat in the dusty office of room 2B for what felt like hours, my hands trembling on top of the journal. $92 million. A secret will, a USB drive full of encrypted files, and a single sentence from the man who had meant more to me than anyone else ever had. I didn't have the strength for a second war, Clara, but I trust you will. It didn't feel like an inheritance. It felt like a torch passed down not in ceremony, but in desperation. What was I supposed to do with this? My first instinct was silence. Walk away. Let Veronica enjoy her victory. Let the world keep believing its comfortable lie. I'd seen what public exposure did to families, to legacies. And I knew, better than most, that truth often punished the one who dared to speak it. But the more I sat with that thought, the more it tasted like cowardice. I opened the USB drive. Inside, folders of financial records, legal correspondence, internal memos from Warren Holdings, and worst of all, recordings, dozens of them. Hidden mic transcripts, emails, even audio from inside Grandpa's own home. One file stood out. I clicked. Veronica's voice. If you want peace, sign it. You're old, you're tired. You've done enough. Don't let some dusty bookstore ruin what I've built. Grandpa. Soft, ragged. This isn't what I built, Veronica. This isn't what your grandmother and I dreamed of. Veronica. Sharper now. Then, maybe it's time someone else rewrites the dream. I slammed the laptop shut. That wasn't ambition. That wasn't grief. That was power poisoning everything it touched. And yet, some part of me still whispered, she's your sister. The girl I once read fairy tales to under the covers. The one I protected when she had nightmares. the one who used to hold my hand when we crossed busy streets. But that girl was gone. And what stood in her place, the cold, glittering woman who mocked me in front of an entire room, wouldn't hesitate to erase me again if it meant more prestige, more control. I breathed deeply, steadying my thoughts. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first, to Mr. Alden, our family lawyer. I requested a private meeting to discuss a matter of contested documentation. I didn't elaborate. His voice sharpened immediately. The second, to a woman named Denise Lark, Grandpa's former estate attorney, long retired, but someone I remembered him speaking fondly of. Her name appeared multiple times in his journal. She answered on the 3rd ring. When I explained what I'd found, there was silence on the line. Then she said, "Your grandfather was a cautious man, Clara. If he kept those records, he wanted you to use them." The next day, I met with both attorneys in a neutral office space. No family, no whispers. Just the hard, undeniable weight of evidence and the unmistakable shift in Mr. Alden's expression as he reviewed the original will. "The date on this, and the signatures. This supersedes the one we read last week," he said quietly. "And the recording?" I asked. He nodded grimly. "If this is authenticated, Veronica could face legal consequences for undue influence, possibly fraud. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Not yet. Because I knew what would come next. The headlines. The board meetings. The downfall. I stood at the edge of a cliff, one push away from destroying everything my sister thought she owned. That night, I went back to the bookstore. I sat in Grandpa's old chair, clutching the journal to my chest, and wept. Not for revenge, not even for justice. But because I had to become something I never wanted to be, the person who tells the truth when no one wants to hear it. I could have gone straight to the press, leaked the recordings, published the alternate will, destroyed Veronica's reputation in one satisfying, brutal blow. The story would have written itself. Golden heiress manipulated elderly grandfather for 120 M fortune. But that was her kind of power, the loud, blazing, all-consuming kind. Mine was quieter. I met with Denise Lark one last time, and we submitted the proper documents to the probate court. A private hearing was scheduled. No cameras, no press, just a room, a table, and the law. I didn't want to watch Veronica fall. I wanted to build something that would outlast both of us. After the hearing, once the court acknowledged the validity of Grandpa's real will and I was named executor of his full estate, I declined the CEO seat at Warren Holdings. The board was shocked. So was the family. But I knew I wasn't meant to lead a company that no longer aligned with the man who built it. Instead, I returned to Waverly Books. And I began to transform it. The front sign was restored, the shelves cleaned. I kept every volume Grandpa had preserved, but added new ones, stories by underrepresented voices, poetry from countries I'd never traveled to, books written in Braille, in languages few in our neighborhood could read. Yet, I renamed the shop. The Warren Archive. A bookstore, a reading room, a non-profit literary foundation, one built on the belief that knowledge passed hand to hand could heal the cracks wealth could not. I used part of the inheritance, not all, to fund scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing literature and library science. I partnered with schools, hosted poetry nights, published Grandpa's unpublished short stories under a small in-house imprint. Veronica stayed silent. I knew her lawyers were working overtime. I wasn't seeking charges. I only submitted the truth. And when the truth stood still, she had no defense. Once, she sent a brief email. Just one line. "You could have destroyed me." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. You were never the one I was trying to save. Because this was never about revenge. It was about realignment. Restoration. Redemption. Not for her. Not even for Grandpa. But for me? For the girl who used to be told she was too quiet to matter, and who now stood inside a bookstore that pulsed with purpose. She waited outside the bookshop. I saw her through the glass one late afternoon as the sun cast long, honeyed streaks across the hardwood floor. Veronica still perfectly dressed, but not pristine. Her eyes were swollen, her shoulders hunched slightly inward. For the first time, she looked human. I opened the door. She didn't speak right away. Just looked around the storefront, at the shelves filled with books she once mocked, at the hand-painted sign above the register, at the small reading nook now filled with kids from the neighborhood, sprawled out on beanbags with paperbacks in their hands. "You turned it into something," she said quietly. "No," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Grandpa did. I just followed the notes he left." She gave a dry, bitter laugh. "You always did read the footnotes no one else bothered with." There was silence between us, then thick and long. I waited. Finally, she said it. "I didn't mean to hurt him. Or you." I didn't flinch. "But you did." Her gaze dropped. "I thought, if I didn't take control, someone else would. He was getting weaker, and I was scared. I've always had to be the one who held it all together." "And that gave you the right to erase me?" Veronica didn't answer. "Not really," just looked down at her hands, twisting a silver ring around her finger. "I came to ask if you could make a statement to the board. Say you don't want to pursue legal action further. They're considering removing me entirely from the company." "You forged a will, Veronica." "I know, and I'll live with it. But please, don't take everything." I studied her. Not the polished woman who stood at the center of attention, commanding rooms, but the little girl who once begged me to braid her hair before school. The same girl who used to cry when I read the sad endings in our books aloud. But I wasn't that sister anymore, and she wasn't that girl. "I'm not going to save you," I said softly. "Not because I hate you, but because I finally love myself enough not to bend." She looked up, startled. Maybe at the calmness. Maybe at the finality. "I didn't come to destroy you," I added. "But I won't protect the lie either." Veronica's lips parted like she wanted to argue. But then she nodded. Slowly. Almost in surrender. She turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the fading light of the street. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just locked the door behind her and let her go. 2 months passed. The bookstore was no longer quiet, not in the old, lonely way. Every morning, someone new walked in. A college student looking for a poetry collection. A retired man asking if we had the original edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. A teenage girl who came in every Tuesday just to read in the corner without buying a thing. I let her. Grandpa would have too. I kept his journal locked in the drawer under the register, next to the sealed copy of his unpublished manuscript. I didn't need to open it often. I already knew the lines by heart. Then one morning, I found a letter. No return address, just a small white envelope tucked between the pages of a philosophy book someone had reshelved the day before. I opened it, half expecting an overdue thank you or donation receipt. Instead it read, "Clara, I don't know you, not really. I only know your bookstore saved me. I walked in last week on a whim. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. I was between jobs, between homes, between everything. And then I sat in the corner and read Baldwin for the first time. For 3 hours, no one asked me to buy. No one asked me to leave. You just offered tea." I walked out, feeling seen. "Thank you. Your grandfather would be proud. M." I stared at the letter for a long time, the paper soft at the edges where someone had clearly folded it carefully, like it mattered. I folded it again, slipped it between the pages of Grandpa's journal, and locked the drawer. Then I turned to the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting amber light across the spines of old books. Outside, people passed without knowing what this space had once been, what it had survived. The empire it had outlasted, the lies it had replaced. But inside, something lived. Not a dynasty, not a revenge story, not even a legacy in the grand, gilded sense of the word. Just a place. Built with intention, protected with truth. and open to anyone who needed to breathe. I brewed a fresh pot of black tea, the kind Grandpa liked, bitter but honest, and sat by the window. Not waiting, not watching, just still. And for the first time since the will reading, I didn't feel like a footnote in someone else's story. I felt like the author of my own.